Welcome back to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education Part 1, and this is session 43. Wow, sometimes I feel like our stuff at the break is okay, never mind. Romans chapter 12, and we're going to pick this up because we've already been so fresh on this. Normally I would read that scripture again because there'd be a week in between, but since we're doing them this way, what I'd like to do then is just kind of review for you the things that we see in the passage when we're starting in verse 10. Now remember, I told you that we left off by saying that verse 10, I need to get this off, sorry. Verse 10 started a sentence, and we saw the threefold pattern for edification. And now, well, let's just read it. Romans 12:3. Give me that next one. Start me with verse 10, Trent. Give me the next slide. There you go. Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love and honor, preferring one another. And then verse 11. Give me that. Oh, is that the end of that? It is. I'm sorry. You know what? Because we read this whole thing, we didn't see that. Open your Bibles. Let's do it that way because I don't have it on the PowerPoint. Trent won't be able to turn to it because he's good, but he can't magically manufacture PowerPoints. And as soon as I say that, he'll probably find a way to do that. Romans chapter 12, and we're gonna back that up to verse 10, and I want to show. Okay. Good job. Discharging that office. I used that illustration when I was in Monaghan's when I was talking about that. Look, I hate to bring this up, but it's in my head. If you knew what was in my head when I was teaching these sessions, you'd just shake your head and go, well, I don't know. If you ever saw the movie Hancock, anybody ever see that with Will Smith? And the guy's trying to show him how to get along with, everybody better and commending the police force for their part. And he was saying, you can say good job, can't you? And Will Smith is just giving him that look. And he goes, say it, good job. You can say it. Good job. Good job. And he's just acting like I'm not saying that. That's the thing that was said at the break when those guys were up here and somebody said, good job. I thought, oh, that's exactly where we're going. Okay. Verse 10, be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love, in honor preferring one another, not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer, distributing to the necessity of saints, given to hospitality. This is one of those times when I'm calling in my, I said I reserve the right to come back and correct, tweak, add to, perfect anything that I may have told you before. This is one of those times when I'm going to do that. I haven't already taught you this, but I'm undoing something that I thought was right as, I just hate to say this on the tape. To some degree, I have to be out ahead of this group because if it doesn't work with me, what makes me think that it's going to work with you, right? And so, unfortunately, there is this pressure to get out ahead, and when you're doing that, you don't have a local assembly. You don't have the interactive learning. You don't have all that. And so sometimes when you go back, and the part where we are now is something that I looked at long ago. I haven't been back to it. But when I came back to it to formulate these notes, I realized that I thought I understood something about this that I didn't get it right. Now, you don't know that it was wrong because I never told it to you. I did say one thing to you about it that was wrong. You may not even remember what that was. But because I was trying to wrap my mind around this threefold pattern for edifying, and I saw verse 10 finish up, verse 11 has three component parts to it. Not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, and serving the Lord. And so, because it was threefold, and because verse 12 was threefold, rejoicing, and I'm just going to abbreviate these because you know what they are, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, and continuing instant in prayer. And then verse 13, here's what I looked at, and I thought, oh, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And I looked at these, and because that was so new to me back there, that, and by the way, I got to tell you, when I first started out with this pattern for edification, locating it, even in verses 3 through 8, was a bit of a chore for me because I had not been taught that way before. And so the thinking part was pretty easy to figure out. A man ought not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly. Okay, that was the thinking part. I got that one figured out. Where did the living and the labor separate? I had to understand what the labor was that made it different from living. Otherwise, they both just look like they're doing something, right? And how do you know the difference? I took those last sessions to explain to you that difference so that maybe it won't take you as long as it took me to wrap your mind around it. So when I was doing this, I was thinking, this is the godly thinking, this is the godly living, this is the godly labor. Same thing here. This is the godly thinking, this is the godly living, this is the godly labor. But there's something terribly wrong with that. And because I didn't really grasp all of that, I wasn't seeing those others the way I was supposed to see them either. So I can't teach it to you that way because I don't believe that's what that is. Here's the other thing that was going on with this. I want to make sure, though, that well, let me just show you. Give me the PowerPoint, Trent. Here's all of those items in a nutshell. There's not slothful in business. That's what starts out. Now, remember, this starts in verse 10, this sentence. Remember, the period is the strongest break, okay? Semicolon is the next strongest break. So, not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. And then we got verse 12, those three, which are rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer. And then the sentence ends in verse 13, but look at the problem in 13. Distributing to the necessity of saints, and lastly, given to hospitality, and then you have a period at the end of the sentence. So here, what was distributing to the necessity of saints, and given to hospitality. And then there was a period. So it started up here with not the thinking, but up here with the living of this component. Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love, in honor preferring one another. And then you get that semicolon, and it says not slothful. Now you know the list. My other problem was this word right here. Not slothful in business. Because up till this point, what has our context been? What did Trent say? Yeah, it's been this local assembly. It's been this group, right? This love, we're not talking about the word of love, we're talking about this local assembly. In verse 10, we're still talking about be kindly affection one to another. Who is that? That's us. That's us. And then in the same sentence, not slothful in business. And you know what? My way of thinking about that was, you have now left the local assembly and you've gone out into the workplace. But look, Are you telling me that in the same sentence that completes the local assembly context, in the same sentence, we changed context right here? We went from the local assembly to the world at large, to the world at large. See, this is the process I went through. And look back at verse 13. Distributing to the necessity of, where are you now? Back in the local assembly. You're telling me in one sentence we changed context twice? See, I'm looking at that and I'm going like, oh, I don't know about that. So what was I thinking when I was over there? Not a question for you to answer aloud. Then, look at this list now. All of this is in that sentence. You know what I observe about this? I'm just going to tell you because of time. I don't see any thinking in that at all. Not slothful in business is not a thinking. Sloth is a description of an action. It's a conduct. Now, lazy, I found out, can describe your thinking, but sloth cannot. That's the difference in those words. As a matter of fact, now, I want to show you one other thing before I kind of get into this. In verse 14, it kind of continues with some things. Look at verse 14. Bless them which persecute you. Bless and curse not. I'll give you that next one. Rejoice with them that do rejoice. Weep with them that weep. It kind of, when you put verse 14 together with this, all of a sudden, you know what that looks like to me? A list of conduct and behavior. These are things you do. These are things you are. You are slothful or not. You are fervent in spirit or not. You are rejoice. You are patient. You are instant. You are distributing. You are give. You either are or you aren't. See, those are things that you either are doing them or you're not doing them, right? All of a sudden I'm thinking, wait a minute, because this I don't think works anymore. So I did this work on sloth, and I think that's the next thing for us to do. Anyway, it goes on 13, 14. Not till you get to verse 16, by the way, and I should have told you this at the outset. The whole thing on godly wisdom, that first decision-making skill of godly wisdom, that runs from verse 3 to verse 16. And you know what I believe this is now? Instead of seeing this as more components of edification with the breakdown of thinking, living, and labor, because I see all of these not as thinking but as conducts. Because I see that, you know what I think this is? I think this now, this is what I understand it to be. I understand this now to be the way in which we learn how to take these first two components of our edifying and turn it into a decision-making skill. That's how that gets done. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that, but I'm just saying it in a sentence for now, because if that's true, these things following in the same sentence, rapid fire, one after another, will make perfect sense to you. And I don't have to force this now into becoming the pattern for edification, because if you were asking me to look, but by the way, in this thing here, thinking, living, labor, even if you say, well, I think slothful is a thinking. Okay, all right. And rejoicing, I think that's a thinking. Well, rejoicing is not a thinking. We're going to define it, and I'll show you exactly what it is. By the way, you know what rejoicing is? It's two things, and the closest it comes to thinking is a feeling. But living in labor, if you're doing that, then verse 13 starts the next one, and distributing to the necessity of saints is not a thinking. See, if he wanted that to be thinking, you know he would say, be mindful of the necessity of the saints. That would be the godly thinking. That's not what he said. And by the way, this not, anytime you see the word not, that's not a component That's exposing the wrong something. Remember, a man ought not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think. Did he just leave it at that and say, here's how I don't want you to think? No, he tells you how to think. Think soberly, according as God hath dealt to every man the measure of faith. He never just leaves the not as a component. And so, by the way, isn't this kind of the opposite? Not slothful, but fervent. So you know what this would be? This would be an exhortation, wouldn't it? Not to be slothful. But let's keep it in the context. And we're going to come back to this, but let's keep it in the context. If I'd been so emphatic about this being the context of the local assembly, and I don't believe in one sentence we've completely changed context twice. See, verse 9 was the godly thinking. 10 was the godly living in labor. And in the same sentence, there's a period break there. And you're telling me that breaking between the components of the same exact feature of kindness in that same sentence, no, we don't break it by a period, but we join it by semicolon and change context to the world and then come back to the local assembly all in the same sentence. I don't buy that. And so as a result, I'm kind of getting off with it, okay? But I know you don't care what I was thinking. I know you don't care. But that's okay. What I'm trying to say is, I said something to you earlier that indicated that you were going to get multiple more patterns of edification in these first 16 verses, and I'm correcting that thought. That's what I'm doing. I don't believe that's what's going on here. So this thing ends in verse 16. Look what it says. Be of the same mind one toward another. That's a thinking, right? Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits. And you know what that does? That kind of brings us full circle back around to where we started this thing, back up there at the beginning of Romans 12. But you'll see that as we get ready to go through that. Now, there's one other thing I want to show you. And the reason I went down to there is to complete this part about getting us through verse 16. But even in this, 14, 15, and 16, and in the old way of thinking, I had another set of components here, another set of components here. But look at, let me show you something. Starting in verse 14, back up here, Paul goes from here down to the end of the chapter, verse 21, and he is telling you how to deal with the people who intend evil for you. And he's talking about it in all kinds of contexts. I just want to read through and just highlight it for you. Bless them which persecute you. Bless and curse not. I don't know why curse not is in there twice. Rejoice with them that do rejoice. Weep with them that weep. Why do people weep? All right, there's something bad that's happened to them, and that's what the context of this is. Those that persecute you, weep with them that weep. Be of the same mind one toward another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits. Recompense to no man evil for evil. Evil? Provide things honest in the sight of all men, if it be possible. And by the way, there are times when it won't be possible. But if it be possible, as much as lieth in you. Now, you know what? Everybody wants to draw a line. But you know what? As much as lieth in Lupe is not the same that lies within John. John has this very low. But you understand, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Give me that next. Therefore, if thine enemy, do you see how this thing is? Persecute you, weeping, evil, enemy. If thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of, and I should have highlighted it, evil, but overcome evil with good. From verse 14 to 21, that's actually what he's talking about is taking place here. He's talking about how to respond to those things. All right, now that we've read through that, let me take you back to that sentence that we talked about back over there in verse 10. So if you'll put that one up for me. Okay, verse 10, be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love, in honor, preferring one another, that being the godly labor. And now, beginning in the next verse, not slothful in business. But if the context really is the local assembly, then I want to ask you a question. Is there any business to be conducted within the framework of the local assembly? Yes. Would you say your father would say to you, don't be slothful about that business? That makes perfect sense, doesn't it? So I don't have to change the context here. But now look, what is the business then? And I don't know if this is the place where I define that or not. I need to look and see, because I don't want to get ahead of my notes. I did that just a moment ago. Actually, what I'm going to do is, it is. Thank you for that. Because the business, folks, is not just the stuff you do. The business has to do with the godly labor. You know what you do? You know what you're laboring in when you labor with your Father? In His business. And what you're doing in His business right here is every bit as much His business as when you get to the heavenly places is His business. Because it's going to translate. What we do here in His business translates into doing it up there, using the same principles. So I thought, okay, so if it's not slothful in business. And by the way, slothful, before I complete, just remind me, I got to come back to that. If we're not being slothful in His business, now I'm going to come back to that sentence, but first I want to take you to the Oxford English Dictionary for sloth. And here it is. Reluctant to work or make an effort, laziness. But now, and that's so, but look what George Crabbe says. A reluctance to bodily exertion is common to all these terms. And what he's talking about is laziness, slothfulness, and sluggishness. That's the ones that headed up this section. To be slothful is never to move otherwise than slowly. There is an animal called the sloth. And do you know why it's called that? Because he only moves slowly, even when he's under attack from a predator. So, laziness, slothfulness, and sluggishness are inherently physical defects. They're not a thinking. There's something about your physical movement. You see? Laziness is, however, not altogether independent of the mind or will. Can a guy be lazy in his thinking? Sure he can, but not slothful. See, sloth is reserved for describing movement slowly. Slothful people never vary their pace. They have a physical impediment in themselves to quick motion. By the way, before we read the next one, I just want to be clear. Just because some kinds of works demand slow movement because of its intricateness or precision, that doesn't mean that's slothful. Okay, so just so we understand, give me this next one, Trent. Charles Smith says, slothful, he says, from the word slow, I didn't know that before I read that, is commonly employed as a relative term in connection with activity. Here's what I found. Not one book would let me define slothful as a way of thinking. Now, if it had used the word lazy, I could have said that, but not this. In connection with activity as a duty to oneself or others. Hence, and look what he quotes, such terms as slothful in business. He used the very verse I'm looking at as the illustration of a kind of activity. Yeah? The man is slothful who is sluggish in such a way as to be dilatory or negligent of the duties which claim his attention. The sluggish man does what he has to do lazily or inertly. Well, I read this other one and I thought, okay, wait a minute. The man is slothful who is sluggish in such a way as to be dilatory or negligent. So I thought dilatory. Better look that one up. The man, dilatory, slow to act, intended to cause delay. Now, I'm not just trying to take you through English class, but what I'm trying to remind us of is these words have meanings that are specific to their use. They're not just thrown in there any old way, which is why God would have never used me to write the Bible. Because, man, I am not that precise with my terminology, but this book is. So now let me complete that sentence. See, you didn't have to remind me. I'm not as old as I thought I was. When he says, don't be slothful in business, and we're talking about our Father's business, then he's saying, don't be slow about getting those offices up and running, and don't be slow about preferring, in honor, preferring one another. In other words, that advancement and encouragement that comes from our lips. By the way, I meant to take you through that, and because of time we didn't do it, but it's in your notes. That the way that preferring gets done in the definition it says is mostly done by our words. And that's why those words, good job. That's why it's an easy way to remember, and I'm just trying to say, and those are things that really do strengthen the assembly. And I think it makes sense on the heels of this for the very next thing to come from Paul's pen is, don't be slow about this. Get this done. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, sir. So it's business that transfers labor into profit.
Well, it is, isn't it? Yeah.
That's the mechanism that transfers labor, our godly labor, into profit for the Father.
Exactly. And for the assembly. Exactly right. Okay, now, let's see. I read that about Charles Smith. I did the deal on dilatory. Okay, we did that. That pattern, I don't think I need to spend, I'm running out of time. I don't think I need to spend, wow, is that right? Okay, look, I'm going to end the session here. Can I just say this? Do I have to go over it? Do you pretty much see how slothful is not a thinking? Do you see that? So I'm just trying to get you to see why now if you come up with something different, you're a son. I'm not creating a law, but I am trying to take you through this to the best of my understanding of it. And I have to tell you that slothful is not a thinking. And by the way, neither is fervent in spirit. That's not describing a thinking either. And even rejoicing, which I'm hoping we're going to have time to get to. So let's stop here. Don't go anywhere. We'll just start the session over on the disc, and then we'll